As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
On National Public Radio shortly after January the 6th, they interviewed Robert Grenier, who had been, he's the author of 88 Days to Kandahar. He had been the CIA station chief in Islamabad at the dawn of the terror war, and kind of inadvertently showed how they helped let bin Laden escape. But anyway, Grenier was interviewed on NPR, and it's this great little double entendre of cool stuff going on, because what he does is he explains, outright admits, that's right, we let Osama bin Laden go. We decided, forget Al-Qaeda, we don't want to get the guys what hit us and killed our people. We want to go after the sort of milieu of extremism in which they were thriving, which meant regime change in Kabul, while bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri, moonwalk across the border unhindered and unchased by Delta Force, who wanted only to kill them. Grenier explains this is the analogy now. He outright admits their treason in helping bin Laden get away. But then he says, that's smart, and that's what we're going to do now. See, the January 6th rioters, the insurrectionists, they're Al-Qaeda in this scenario. And what we want to do is not so much focus on them, as we want to focus on, that sort of broader milieu of extremism in which they're thriving, by which he meant the American right, the entire American right, the pro-Donald Trump MAGA movement, or the Taliban. And we're going to regime change their ass because of what Al-Qaeda did at the Capitol that day, he said.
Yeah, I'm looking at this right now, actually. A New York Times opinion, how to defeat America's homegrown insurgency. Let me just add to this, actually, just because, I'm one of these sort of weird guys who spent way too much time in DARPA grant, looking through all the DARPA grants for this type of stuff, with how they actually make the sausage for censorship. I am willing to bet a bagel that Robert Grenier did not come up with this sort of hypothesis about how to manage the homegrown insurgency by doing it targeting the middle rather than leaders or whatnot on his own. That is what you just said is strikingly similar to the DARPA-funded domestic censorship grants that were given out to 60-some universities between 2016 and 2020. There's one that immediately comes to mind called "Slaying the Online Hate Hydra," which basically posited that if you were against open borders, you were effectively engaging in sort of identitarian hate speech. And they were using the same sort of proxy in Europe for groups that all happened to be peace with Russia parties or anti-war parties, because they tended to be working class and wanted cheap energy from improved Russian economic ties. And so, of course, the CIA the State Department were plotting to kill all those or politically subjugate all those political parties, and they often would use these hate speech predicates to do it. And what was really fascinating about, for example, just this one thing, just as a reference for the audience if they want to look this up, "Slaying the Online Hate Hydra." This is a DARPA-funded censorship research grant, which examined 4 different ways to go about ideally censoring the internet in order to take out basically people who had the wrong thinking opinions when it comes to things like immigration. And the first way, was like the classic top-down type thing. Like, you kicked down. This is back in 2018, I think, is when this grant was. This is like 3 years before Trump was actually kicked off Twitter. They said, we could kick these people, we could kick the leaders off of the social media companies. But the problem is there's often this kind of martyr effect, and it sort of feeds into the same issue we have with insurgency, where we kill one high-profile person, but that act of martyrdom creates 100 new insurgents because they're all mad that their leader has been taken down. So they said, okay, well, what if we don't do top-down censorship, and what if we topographically map the network of connections that the leaders have to their, say, lieutenant class? Who are the top 20 lieutenants who are not as high profile, who are not household names, who tend to be the key amplifiers of the leader, so that when the leader, sort of tweets something out or makes a YouTube video or a Facebook post, it doesn't have that same level of virality because they had their top sort of, second in command type, the sort of lieutenant class amplifiers are gone. That's one way we could do it that would minimize the martyr effect. Another way is we could keep the leaders, and we could keep a lot of the lieutenants, but we could do a sort of, we could topographically map the whole network, and we could just sort of slowly or randomly or partially ban or throttle or suppress the sort of great unwashed middle, who so that way everybody still nobody notices that censorship is happening, because the highest profile people still have their accounts, and so do the sort of semi-celebrity people who amplify them. but they're just not. It just looks like they're organically not having any traction, not having any amplification, because the people who don't have a voice to defend themselves are the ones who are getting kicked off the internet.
These people are evil, man. How do they? These are Americans?
Yes.
Well, okay, so let's talk about.
And you should, by the way, Scott, you should see. I have all this, by the way, on my Twitter page. I've gone over this. Yeah. At Mike Ben Cyber, and just I think if you type in either DARPA or Slaying the Online Hate Hydra, you'll see this. The mathematical equations that they actually sketch out to do this are a true sight to behold. I mean, it's almost like it looks. Now I'm not a sort of math quant guy, but the level of computer science engineering that they propose to go into creating this vast system to do exactly what you were just saying Robert Grenier was proposing, but for internet censorship in 2018, mind you. I mean, it was a level of technical precision that is that is truly shocking, and shows that the depths that they'll go to actually execute this.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
You go on to say, this is a hot esoteric subject. Aquinas taught that all rational persons are capable of discerning right from wrong and good from evil by the exercise of free will and human reason, and they do not need the government to aid them in this endeavor. This is generally known as natural law. Judge, what the hell are you talking about, natural law? I'm the government. I'll tell you what to do. Listen to me. I don't care if your mother, your father, your sister, or brother are dying. We got COVID going on, and you can't go see them as they're breathing their last breath. I'm the governor of New Jersey. I'm the governor of Massachusetts. I'm the governor of New York and California. You have no natural law. This is America.
Well, you described this perfectly in characterizing recent events through which we all sadly lived. They trampled natural law and natural rights. I mean, the theory of natural law is it's a restraint on the government. The government is bound by natural law. Of course, it's not. I mean, they all take the oath to uphold the Constitution. Natural law is expressly embodied in the Ninth Amendment. They don't care about it. But if they recognized natural law, we would truly be a free country. Because
there's this guy who's playing the Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk. He came out last week and said, quote, you ready? The time for peace is over.
Oh, boy.
The post-war era is over. We are living through new times. You ready? The pre-war times.
Wow. They are just crazy. They're going to poke the bear, and the bear has nuclear weapons. And Biden has, here I'm confusing them. Putin has no interest whatsoever in Kyiv or in Warsaw. He just wants to make sure that the ethnic Russians in Ukraine are not killed by their own government, and that Ukraine does not join NATO and put offensive weaponry at his border. That's it. That was the deal that was crafted 2 years ago in Turkey. The agreement, I'm holding my fingers up an inch apart. The agreement was an inch thick. The agreement was initialed by the Russian negotiators and the Ukrainian negotiators. They were ready to sign it until Joe Biden sent that goofball Boris Johnson, then the Prime Minister of Great Britain, to say to Zelensky, don't sign it, don't sign it. We'll back you. The Americans will back you. We'll get rid of Putin. We'll steal back your Crimea. You'll be a great country again, all because of this war. We'll help you fight and win. 2 years later, 500,000 young men dead or so disabled they can't go back to the military, Ukrainian young men. And Putin, within inches of capturing the territory that's ethnic Russian. How do we know what's ethnic Russian? Because the Zelensky government has been bombing them. It would be like Washington bombing a portion of New Mexico where Mexicans lived. That's the moral equivalent of what Zelensky is doing and has been doing, and that the Russians are trying to stop.
Again, what you're saying, these are all facts, and people have no idea. They killed in the Donbass region before this began over 15,000 people. And the Donbass, what happened was when they had the coup, they put in that guy Yatsenyuk. And matter of fact, Victoria Nuland was caught on the phone with that guy, another little boy of nothing, Jeffrey Pyatt, who is the UN ambassador to Ukraine, saying F you to the EU. She actually said the word, Right. And we're going to put Yatsenyuk, a little nothing of a clown. And then they put in that other guy, Poroshenko. And then and again, this isn't my data. These are the facts. 89%, 89% of the Ukrainian people, according to the latest poll, their number one concern, over 90%, of course, is the war. 89%, government corruption.
Wow. Wow. Well, the 300 million that the Defense Department just found, I wonder how much of it is cash. So they might as well put it in the fireplace and light it on fire.
So going back to what he said when we're saying World War III has begun, this little clown boy at Tusk over there in Poland, the fight against totalitarian trends, corruption, and lies is taking place on many fronts. The most dramatic illustration of this, of course, what is happening in the war in Ukraine. We are facing a simple choice. Either we fight to protect our borders, territory, and values, and defend our citizens and future generations, or accept the alternative that is defeat. Then that other arrogant little boy, that NATO Secretary Stoltenberg, last month he said, the U.S.-led alliance should brace for, quote, a confrontation that could last for decades.
Wow. Well, you were right. When all else fails, they take you to war. World War III has begun.
It's begun. And the people have no clue. They have no clue of what's going on. And when you tell them about this, the first reaction is people say, oh, those Russians, they're trying to grip. Stop. They have no clue of anything. So I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned with what's going on, and the people must unite for peace, or else we're going to die in war.
You run your mouth and I run my business, brother. You tell everybody I'm busted. You talk so much you got me disgusted. But you run your mouth and I run my business, brother.
This is Thomas Massey. I haven't watched his full speech yet, but he put this out on Twitter, and I thought that it was a good point. Let's give it a listen.
An overly broad bill, and they got an exclusion written into the bill that I want to read. It says the term covered company does not include an entity that operates a website or application whose primary purpose is to allow users to post product reviews, business reviews, or travel information and reviews. Why is this exception in the bill? Why did somebody feel like they needed this exception if the bill itself only covers social media applications that foreign adversaries are running? These and other questions we hope to answer in the course of this debate, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves the...
I think it's obvious to all of us that they're trying to find new ways that they can regulate the internet, that they can make sure that there isn't competition in ideas, that the information that you're seeing is being controlled by the United States government, that the algorithms are being controlled by the United States government. And so this is probably just the starting point for, things that might even end up pushing, the Twitters, Elon Musk, or otherwise. All right. And
the vote this morning was a vote to protect the national security of our country and the privacy of our citizens. I pointed out at the time that the TikTok in China broadcast into Taiwan that the Uyghurs love what the Chinese are doing. It's genocide. The people in Hong Kong love the crushing of their democracy in Hong Kong. And the Tibetans talked about how they are suppressed on TikTok there and how they are misrepresented on TikTok there. So for these and other reasons, this is about human rights and privacy and democracy. But most importantly, if the Chinese government, as it does with ByteDance and its partnership, controls the algorithm, we are at their mercy.
I want to pause here because this is what I was talking about of when they talk about the fear of what China is able to do. Aren't they kind of showing their hands when they talk about, oh, but they'll have all this big data? Yeah, but you have all the big data. Oh, well, if they can control the algorithms, you mean what you guys are doing? Because I don't believe for one second that YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and the likes are without influence of government. I mean, you still got those lawsuits going on about what was going on during COVID. I've been listening to a little bit of the Supreme Court hearings about it, but we all know that they were like, hey, we'd really appreciate if some of that information wasn't available. Hey, we're looking at the information available, and it looks like your algorithm is still pushing this kind of content. Hey, it appears to us, magically, the advertisers all care about these specific safety standards and ensuring that this kind of information isn't available. Hey, Boeing, before you go and you spend more money on the YouTube platform, do you mind having a conversation with them to make sure that people that are criticizing the Israel war aren't being amplified? I don't know if that's a particular censorship, but they're kind of showing you the hands here that the algorithms of the way the content is being pushed on the platform is very important to governments. And so we can't have a China apparatus within our country because then we can't control the algorithm to make sure that our kids aren't dancing too much, which that one I approve. You guys want to come forward and say, hey, there's a little bit too much dancing going on the internet. I'll get behind that one. All right, this one's interesting. Boeing whistleblower who raised safety concerns found dead. Attorney says he's shocked. And for those of you guys who are not in the know on the story, the Boeing whistleblower did have some juicy claims. And hopefully there's enough other people who are covering this that the Boeing people don't get insights onto my channel. But here we have the guy. He's on TMZ talking about the problems at the Boeing plants and how they're not properly doing safety checks. They don't have proper concerns. They're shoving planes into the air that shouldn't be in the air. Let's give this a watch.
The FAA is saying that the plane is now safe to fly. What do you say?
One, this is not a 737 problem. It's a Boeing problem. And I know the FAA has gone in and they've done due diligence and inspections to assure that the door plugs of the 737 are installed properly and the fasteners are torqued properly. But my concern is what's the rest of the airplane? What's the rest of the condition of the airplane? And the reason my concern for that is back in 2012, Boeing started removing inspection operations off their jobs. So it left the mechanics to buy off their own work. So what we're seeing with the door plug blowout is what I've seen with the rest of the airplane, as far as jobs not being completed properly, inspection steps being removed, issues being ignored. My concerns are with the 737 and the 787, because those programs have really embraced the theory that quality is overhead and non-value added. So those two programs have really put a strong effort into removing quality from the process. When I first started working at Charleston, I was in charge with pushing back defects to our suppliers. And what that meant was I'd take a group of inspectors and actually go to the supplier and inspect their product before they sent it in. Well, I'd taken a team of 4 inspectors to Spirit Aerosystems to inspect the 41 section before they sent it to Charleston. And we found 300 defects. Some of them were significant that needed engineering intervention. When I returned to Charleston, my senior manager told me that we had found too many defects and he was going to take the next trip. So the next trip he went on, he took 2 of my inspectors. And when they got back, they were given accolades for only finding 50 defects. So I pulled that inspector aside and I said, did Spirit really clean up their act that quick? That don't sound right. And she was mad. She said, no. Said the 2 inspectors were given 2 hours to inspect the whole 41 section and they were kicked off the airplane.
Doesn't sound great. Doesn't sound great. And then that guy found dead in his car. Now, I don't know. I mean, you're talking about Boeing. You're talking about big-time military-industrial complex. I mean, listen, you want to say bad things about pharma, you might lose your job, and you might, you might get taken down from the internet. You might get shadow banned. You might have a hard time getting your information out into the world. But you start talking shit on the defense contractors, and you are playing a different game, my friends. I mean, sure, is it possible that he just Clintoned himself in the backseat, just suicided himself? Of course. Anything's possible. We have no idea what happened in this, but talk about a juicy story. Seeing all these things on the news, problems with the planes, and you get a whistleblower who's a part of the court case found dead in his car. Really does seem like some movie shit.
The Peter Schiff Show.
Now, people are upset that, well, the Chinese, I think when you go on TikTok in China, I think the kids are shown, more sophisticated or more intelligent information or something like that. But in America, it's dumbed down. Well, I don't think that's because of propaganda. They're just appealing to Americans because that's what Americans want. I mean, Americans have already been dumbed down by our educational system, our government schools. It's not the Chinese government that's responsible for the poor academic performance of American youth. And the fact that the content on TikTok seems to be tailored to a much lower intellect than in China. Well, of course, the Chinese are doing a much better job educating their kids than the Americans are. So the content just happens to fit the market, right? We're a pretty dumb market. I mean, the average American teen, I mean, my God. So this content appeals to them. It's not that China is dumbing us down. We've already been dumbed down. And so we're just getting the content that we deserve. That is the problem. The solution is not to ban TikTok, but let's ban these government schools. Let's get the government out of education. Let's have the private sector educating our kids, not the government. That would be a solution to this problem. If you're worried about our children being brainwashed and indoctrinated, get them out of the public schools. That would actually help. I don't care if they want to use TikTok. Let's liberate them from those government schools with a voucher system or however they want to do it. But of course, that's not going to happen. They're going to resist that. Now, I mentioned a little earlier that I thought there was a tie-in between gold and TikTok. Because if the Senate approves this TikTok ban, which the House has already approved, and which President Biden has already said he will sign, right? assuming he can remember how to do that. But this is going to pass. And after it passes, what is China going to do? You know, we're now telling the Chinese government, hey, we don't want this company. You can't operate this company in our country. I mean, are they going to retaliate? I would think so. I mean, I don't think they want to lose face here. I mean, they're our biggest supplier and our biggest banker. So it's like, oh, so all of these products, you know, you can have all these Chinese products, but TikTok's not welcome. Oh, and we can owe trillions of your treasuries. We're allowed to buy all the treasuries we want, but your citizens can't even download our app. I think the way they may retaliate, and again, I'm not advocating this. I'm just pointing out their position, what they could do if they were smart. And I assume that they are smart, right? If they want to hit America where it hurts, they don't have to ban any of our products, right? It's not like, they just start selling our treasuries. They sell our dollars, which they're already doing. They just step it up. I mentioned that gold sold off after we got the hotter than expected inflation numbers, but it rallied back today, gained back most of what it lost. Bonds also sold off yesterday, and then they sold off again today to add to yesterday's losses. So that already shows me, again, that the investors are starting to figure it out. More of them will, and the moves are going to be bigger, that the inflation fight is over only because inflation won and the government conceded. And that is bearish for bonds, and that is bullish for gold. But if the Chinese decide that the way they want to retaliate is by selling dollars and treasuries faster and then buying more gold, which they have a short window of opportunity. Where is that window of opportunity? It's coming from the liquidations out of the GLD. So while Americans are foolishly selling off their gold to buy Bitcoin ETFs, that gives the Chinese a window of opportunity to unload their treasuries and buy that gold. And that is a great swap for China because they get rid of paper and they get real gold. Meanwhile, Americans get the short end of the stick. They sell their gold and get digital nothing. But I think the Chinese will probably try to take advantage of this. And so what does this mean for Americans? If the Chinese do what I'm saying they could do, and it's in their interest, so they should do it, it's going to hurt America. It's going to hurt America a lot more than banning TikTok is going to hurt China. Because if China really starts divesting of its dollars and treasuries and buys gold, what is that going to do to the value of the US dollar? What is that going to do to consumer prices and interest rates here in the United States? It's going to send them much higher. So in addition to not being able to use TikTok, Americans are going to pay higher prices for everything they need to buy, and they're going to be paying higher interest rates if they need to borrow the money to buy it. So again, we are completely underestimating the Chinese position in this ridiculous battle that shouldn't even be fought. But again, I think the government is just using this ruse of the animosity that people have to this Chinese boogeyman to dupe us into surrendering our rights. Right? That's always how the government usurps more power. They get us to fear something, and they say that we need more government to protect us from this contrived threat. And so that's what they've done. And that's what Congress is signing on to. At least Trump, who originally talked favorably about banning TikTok, has now done a 180, and he says that we shouldn't do it. So at least he's evolved that position in the proper direction. What the source of that 180, I don't know. Maybe it's legitimate, genuine. He thought about it. But this Congress is going to pass it. So again, this is bad news for America. It's bad news for American liberties, just like the tariffs. Trump puts the tariffs on China. China doesn't pay the tariffs. Americans pay the tariffs. It's a tax on Americans. And the ban on TikTok is not a ban on China. It's a ban on Americans. It prevents Americans from using a Chinese product, but it opens up the door for the government to ban Americans from using all sorts of products. And it sets a very bad precedent that ultimately will be abused and exploited.
Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
I interviewed Paul Gottfried on my show. He's a absolutely great guy. I love him. And it's like, he's like a litmus test that I use. Like if somebody likes Paul Gottfried, I figure it's probably a good guy, So I asked him, I said, for years and years, we hear, every 4 years, this is the most important election in American history, right? This one right here. And then 4 years later, it's going to be that one. And there's never going to be one where they say, this one, I could kind of take or leave. It's always the most important. But I said, but is there a chance? I mean, it's like the boy who cried wolf. Remember, there eventually was a wolf at the end of the story. There could well be. We could get to a point where this is the most important election in our lifetimes or ever. And I said, how do you think about that claim for the 2024 election? And he said, I actually think it is. I actually think it is, because if you don't change course now, there are all these bad things, starting from the lawfare all on down. There's so many bad things that could happen that it could indeed be unrecoverable after this. And he says that as a guy who in the primary period was not rooting for Trump, thinks Trump is a very, very flawed guy, but he doesn't hate his guts, at least. He doesn't hate Paul Gottfried's guts. And in 2024, that's about the best you can expect. And maybe he could hold off the hordes for 4 more years till a better guy comes along. So that was his argument. Now, you, meanwhile, are not just you. I mean, I've also been, interested in the fate of the LP. But somebody might legitimately ask Dave Smith, look, at a time like this, when there are all kinds of existential threats to the America that we once knew that may be gone forever, how can you luxuriate in your, well, I'm above all this, I'm going to vote for the Libertarian nominee, when I know that person's not going to win, and meanwhile, I could have voted for somebody more likely to win who could stop what is certainly going to happen to us if the Democrats win again. It's a common question. You heard it a million times, but, it's a legitimate question. How do you answer it?
Well, I mean, look, it's almost like, to me, when it's not, my position is not that, and I hate some of these slogans that people in the Libertarian Party make. It's not like, I won't vote for the lesser of two evils or something. I think that's stupid. Like, I definitely would vote for the lesser of two evils in many situations. Like, I would vote for a 10% income tax over a 90% income tax, and I think that's the lesser of two evils. But if there was a referendum on that, I'd certainly vote for the 10% tax. So it's not that, and it's not. I'm not like saying I'm not. I don't think I'm making the perfect the enemy of the good. It's that I look at it more in a situation where it's like you're bleeding out and you're going to die. And they're like, well, one guy has a Band-Aid and the other guy doesn't have anything. So wouldn't you at least vote for the one guy with the Band-Aid? And you're like, a Band-Aid is irrelevant at this point. This is not going to do anything. And Donald Trump, he's got 4 years on the record. And I just see no reason that he won't just get completely rolled and maybe even accelerate this plan. Donald Trump's 4 years culminated in 2020. And he has demonstrated over and over again that he has not learned anything from it. He's just bragging about Operation Warp Speed the other day on Truth Social. He was stuff, Tom. He was demonizing Sweden into the summer for them not being locked down in the summer of 2020, that is. And then also I just think that people get a little bit mystical when they talk about politics and government, because of course, as we kind of know, like the whole thing doesn't exist in a sense. Like in a sense it does, but in another sense it doesn't. It's a social construct. But look, I live in like a red country town, but I live in a very blue state. My vote, whether I voted for Donald Trump or voted for Michael Rechtenwald or whoever, it's a protest vote either way. I know the way my state's going. I'm not, you know what I mean? So if I'm going to protest vote, let me protest vote with who I actually agree with. And, my concern with all of this stuff is like, as I said to Bob Murphy the other day, I'm a Ron Paulian. I believe in spreading ideas. I believe in spreading a message and speaking to the remnant. That's the business I'm in. And if somebody else has some plan where Donald Trump's going to get in there and actually efficiently wield power in order to like hold off this globalist agenda, it's like, all right, well, he certainly didn't seem too good at wielding power last time. I mean, the guy got framed for treason for 4 years and not a single person who framed him got in trouble. One FBI agent, I think the guy who misled the FISA courts got a conviction with no jail time, I believe, but that's it. And so, I don't know, I'm just not seeing it. But again, if you're telling me you want to support Donald Trump, okay, I understand the arguments for rejecting Joe Biden. That's for sure.
Well, we're Big Tent here on the Tom Woods Show. We can all agree on that.
What did we talk about yesterday? TikTok?
Yeah, we were on right when the House voted.
And, it came on late and exploded. Yeah. And now it's continued to explode. But I look at it as these people who want to pass this rule where we can kick TikTok out. Yeah. They're excited like, we just stopped World War III. Yeah. It would be so dangerous. It's national security. So anyway, but on more digestion of this, there's more and more people speaking out. And there's not many people changing their mind to being, against his bill. The amount of votes on there was tremendous to support this. But once again, the speed of how some of the big things happen, we revisit so often. What happened on 9/11? Within days, they had the Patriot Act. Well, when did they write it up? When did they have hearings? When did they have any votes? None of that, and it was prepared. So the time came, and they used it. This is a little bit like that, There was this discussion going on, but all of a sudden it was an absolute emergency, and then the votes were there.
House Democrats will attempt to force a vote on the $95 billion war bill. Now, maybe there's a component to this that we're missing out on, Dr. Paul, but I'm slightly disappointed in Representative Jim McGovern because you worked with him a lot. Has been a good progressive. You can leave that up. But apparently he is working to do a discharge petition to get that aid bill on the floor, to get that $61 billion to Ukraine, $14 billion to Israel, a bunch of money to Taiwan for warmongering. He's going to force Johnson's hand to get to the floor.
So he's representing the position that we give more money for war and none to protect our borders?
Yeah, he wants to get that bill to the floor. He wants to pass the aid bill
without
the borders.
Without the border money,
yeah.
And that's the that's a bigger issue. If you just go out and poll a lot of people in this country, and say, yeah, we should do it. That's how some of this discussion started. Was we keep sending more and more, and we're running out of money for Ukraine. And what are you doing about the borders? And well, if somebody gets in there and does it, they'll say, oh well, we need umpteen number of billions of dollars again. Yeah. But it's in motion right now. Although I do not accept this idea because I heard at every election, I think I can remember, this is the most important election ever. Well, it is important, and it could turn out to be a little bit more important. But the whole thing is the same old stuff. It's the bad guys that are dishonest, don't believe in truth, they don't believe really, and they don't understand the Constitution. Do you follow the Constitution? How often have you ever voted for something that was not explicitly authorized in the Constitution? There's hardly anything that they pass that it's not explicitly. That's why I thought a moratorium ought to be on all new stuff, and that we elect a group of people, throw them all out, and give them 4 years to improve things only by repealing.
Yeah, that's
get rid of the bad stuff. Boy, wouldn't they somebody have a grand day removing all the regulation? See, that's not legislation. Yeah, it's legislation. Illegal legislation should have never been passed.
That should put you in charge of that. That would take care of a lot of problems.
XX.
Well, the last thing I saw just before we went online here is that apparently Speaker Johnson met with some members of the Senate to talk about this bill. And here's the way it looks like it might be moving. We're not sure, it's not confirmed, but it looks like what he's going to do to get around this is he's going to say, well, this isn't aid, this is a loan. They're going to pay us back. Ukraine's going to pay us back. The country is decimated. They lost half their population, but they're going to, it's like those student loans. They're going to pay us back. Don't worry about it.
Good examples, too. And they pay their interest and everything else. Yeah. And who really gets filed up there are the people who were talked into taking these loans or were forced to take the loan, and they're very sincere and honest within a system that's really messy. They go and they do this, and they cannot pay. They don't pay the bills back. So the people who either stayed out of the system and worked hard, you could have two 18-year-olds and one borrows all the money and gets a job and finally gets that degree that didn't do him any good. And then you take somebody else that's worked all that time. The person that maybe worked without the education, but he worked hard, their penalty is great.
Yeah.
It's not a very good system.
No, it's not. But apparently, so from this meeting, talking about making it a loan, which is just trying to put lipstick on the pig, but also he did not mention, according to someone who was in the meeting, did not mention the border with Mexico when he met with the senators. And the article also quoted Senator John Cornyn, who is from the deep state, masquerading as a Texan, and he said that he heard Speaker Johnson say, we will not leave Ukraine empty-handed or something like that. So clearly now it looks to me at least like this is going to move as well.
Bad news for the American taxpayer and for the concept of liberty, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
But we're not giving it up.
We're not giving it up.
Because there's all those tools and technology that are being used against us. But we shouldn't fear that technology that China has and they can use. We should fear the authoritarianism of a government.
Yes.
And I think the founders were pretty astute to say all enemies, foreign and domestic, and they knew about that. But right now, the domestic concerns are just flipped down as a little political chicaneries and fighting over, and it's pure politics that doesn't amount to real issues. I think they on purpose pass things quickly because they don't want to hear that discussion.
Yeah. Well, I'm just looking at our comments here, and Joshua Clement said, first TikTok, then the Ron Paul Liberty Report. And it sounds funny, but it's not that far from the truth. They just designate you a bad guy, and then you're gone. So
see, there are some people concerned about what's going on, and they're all our friends.